Everyone laughed when he poured water on her notebook. Even the teacher looked away. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just picked it up, slowly, fingers pressing against the soaked pages like she was trying to hold something sacred together. Like the ink bleeding through the paper still meant something. Like it still mattered. And in that silence, in that unbearable, humiliating silence that the whole classroom wrapped themselves in like a warm coat, she lifted her eyes. Not to the ceiling. Not to the floor. To him. It wasn't fear in her gaze. It wasn't even anger. It was something older than both. Something that lived in the space between recognition and grief, like she had seen him before. Not in this classroom, not in this school. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere neither of them had the language for. Jae-won blinked. Just once. And for the first time in 4 years of running this school, of owning every corridor, every whisper, every flinch, something inside his chest made a sound he didn't recognize. Not a crack. Not yet. But the beginning of one. The morning had started the way all mornings at Hanguk International Academy started, with performance. The school sat on the elevated edge of Mapo district in Seoul, glass and steel catching the early autumn light like it had been designed specifically to impress the parents of children who needed impressing. Which it had. It served the children of diplomats, corporate executives, foreign business elites, and though never listed in the prospectus, the sons and daughters of people whose wealth had no clean origin story. Park-jae arrived at 8:47 a.m. for an 8:30 class. He always did. The hallway parted before him the way water parts before something heavy dropped into it, not dramatically, not with announcement, but with the quiet, physical certainty of displacement. Students stepped aside without looking at him directly. A junior boy flattened himself against the locker bank. 2 girls from the international track whispered to each other, eyes cutting sideways. Jae-won walked through all of it like weather. Like something that simply was, and could not be argued with. He was not physically imposing in the way that demanded attention. He was lean, not broad. His school uniform always slightly undone, collar open one button, sleeves pushed to the forearm even in October. His face was the kind of face that painters once called dangerous, all-composed lines, a jaw that held tension even at rest, eyes that processed rooms the way a general processes maps. Not looking at things. Looking through them. He pushed open the classroom door without knocking. 23 pairs of eyes moved to him. Mr. O, the homeroom teacher, a nervous man in his 40s whose career had been quietly redirected 3 times in 2 years since Jae-won enrolled, glanced up from the attendance sheet, then down again. "You're late," he said. To the attendance sheet. Not to Jae-won. Jae-won walked to his seat at the back left, the seat that had somehow, organically, always remained his, and dropped into it with the looseness of someone sitting in their own living room. His bag hit the floor. He stretched one arm across the desk beside him, claiming the geometry of the room without asking. Beside him, Minute Seo laughed at something on her phone and angled the screen toward him. He glanced at it. Said nothing. His eyes, without his permission, traveled forward. To the 3rd row, window seat. To the girl who had not looked up when he entered. Her name was Amora Oay. She had been at Hanguk International for 6 weeks, a transfer from London, though she was Ghanaian, and before London, Accra, and before that a childhood that moved like water through many containers. She was the daughter of Dr. Kwame Oay, an international health policy consultant currently on assignment with a Seoul-based WHO satellite initiative, and a mother who had died when Amora was 11, quietly and without warning, in a way that restructured Amora's entire relationship with silence. She sat now with her notebook open, not a laptop, an actual notebook, the kind with a soft burgundy cover worn soft at the corners from handling, and she wrote with the focused absorption of someone for whom writing was not a choice but a requirement. Like breathing. Like the alternative was suffocation. She wore her natural hair pulled up and back, held with a wrap of deep orange fabric that caught the window light like something painted deliberately. Her uniform was pressed, exact. Her posture was straight, not the performative straightness of someone trying to be noticed, but the internal straightness of someone who had learned that the body must sometimes carry what the face cannot show. She was not beautiful in the way the school understood beauty. She was not performing beauty. She simply was, with a completeness that the room around her had not yet learned to receive. Jae-won had noticed her the day she arrived. He had told himself he hadn't. The bell rang for second period and the room redistributed itself into the chaotic social geometry of teenagers between classes. Before we continue, I'd like to remind you to hit the subscribe button if you want more stories like this. Jae-won stood. His crew assembled around him with the practiced ease of boys who had made themselves into satellites: Hyunki, broad-shouldered and loud; Lee-soo, who laughed at everything 2 seconds after Jae-won did, and Bae Tai, who handled the logistical cruelties of Jae-won's social reign with cheerful efficiency. They moved toward the windows. Toward her. It wasn't coordinated. It never was. That was the elegance of it, the way the cruelty was always casual, always deniable, always wrapped in the language of boredom rather than intent. Hyunki bumped her desk with his hip as he passed. Her pen rolled off. He didn't look down. She picked it up. Kept writing. Jae-won settled against the desk behind her. Looked at the back of her neck. At the orange fabric of her hair wrap. "What are you always writing?" he asked. His voice was not loud. It never needed to be. The classroom had learned to quiet itself around his words. She didn't answer immediately. Finished the sentence she was writing. Then set the pen down with a deliberateness that felt, somehow, pointed. "Notes," she said. "For what?" "Class. We haven't had class yet today." He looked around his crew, stretching out his hands like wanting them to testify. "For yesterday's class." He tilted his head. Around him, the crew waited. The classroom watched with the peripheral attention of people who want to see something happen but don't want to be responsible for watching it. "You always write like someone's going to read it," he said. Laughter, immediate, servile, filling the room like gas fills a space. Amora said nothing. Jae-won reached forward. Picked up the water bottle sitting on the corner of her desk, his posture shifting into something that was almost gentle, almost idle, the most dangerous kind of movement, and tilted it. Water poured across the open notebook pages. The ink bloomed and bled and spread in real time, sentences dissolving, margins flooding, the careful architecture of her notes destroyed in 4 seconds. The laughter got louder. Mr. O, returning from wherever teachers go when they need not to see things, found something urgent in his drawer. Amora looked at the notebook. She stood slowly. Picked it up. Pressed her hands flat against the soaked pages. Closed it carefully. She moved to step around him. He shifted, not aggressively, not with any gesture that could be named or reported, just enough. His hip and shoulder creating a wall of almost that stopped her without touching her. She lifted her eyes. And there it was. That look. Not fear. Not the thing he was used to, the flinching, the reddening, the looking away that confirmed the hierarchy and put everyone back in their correct coordinates. What she gave him was something else entirely. It was pain, not for herself, not quite, but the kind of pain that comes from recognizing something in another person that they cannot see in themselves. The kind of look someone gives a wounded animal that is still trying to bite. She looked at him like she knew him. Like she was sorry about it. He moved aside. She walked to the door. He stood where she had been and the laughter around him continued and he let it continue and he arranged his face into the correct shape, bored, satisfied, done, and inside his chest, in the place where the crack had almost begun that morning, something pressed a little harder. He didn't name it. He turned away. The basketball court behind the main building was Jae-won's second throne. Here the performance was different, not dominance through stillness but through motion. He moved on a court the way he moved through hallways, like the space had been built for him, like gravity itself had agreed to cooperate. He played well. Better than well. He played with the careless excellence of someone who had natural talent and had spent years trying to convince himself it didn't matter to him. It mattered. The afternoon crowd was the usual students with nowhere better to be, a cluster of underclassmen who treated watching Jae-won play like watching something aspirational, 2 girls from the international cohort who had been trying to catch his attention for 3 weeks. He scored. The crowd responded. He was mid-celebration when he saw her. Amora walked along the path that ran beside the court fence alone, bag over one shoulder, her pace unhurried but purposeful, like someone who had decided that moving through difficult terrain with dignity was itself a form of resistance. She was looking at her phone. Probably walking home, or to the library, or to wherever she went at the end of the day. "Hey, African," someone shouted from the stands. Jae-won recognized the voice. Lee Soo. Being loud for the crowd, the way he always was. "Your hair is blocking the sun." Laughter. Amora didn't stop walking. Didn't flinch. Didn't give the satisfaction of a reaction. Jae-won laughed. The sound came out of him automatically, correctly, the right laugh, the right duration, the one that said I am with them, I approve, this is my court and my rules. He let it out and felt it land the way all performances land when you've done them long enough, slightly outside of you, slightly hollow. He was still watching her when she turned the corner and disappeared. He stopped laughing. Just stopped. The ball bounced back to him. He held it. Kyunki called for the pass. He made the pass. But he didn't smile again for the rest of the game. Nobody noticed. Or if they did, they had the intelligence not to say so. The Park family home existed in a category of architecture that was not really about comfort. It was about statement. 4 floors of glass and dark stone in a residential pocket of Gangnam that had been curated so specifically that even the trees along the road appeared to have been chosen for their emotional register: severe, contained, expensive. The interior was what designers call cold modern, surfaces that reflected rather than absorbed, furniture that asked you not to touch it, rooms that held silence the way museum halls do, as a feature rather than an absence. Jae-won's father, Park Sung-jin, was seated at the long dining table when Jae-won arrived home at 7. He was not eating. He was reading physical documents, never digital, never anything that could be screenshotted or traced. He wore a charcoal suit that he had not loosened despite the hour, despite being at home. He did not look up. Jae-won Saturday. A housekeeper brought food. 2 plates. Silence presided over the table like a third family member who had been there longer than either of them. After 11 minutes, Jae-won had counted. In the way children learn to count the seconds of difficult things, his father set down his document. "Your homeroom teacher submitted the monthly behavior summary," Sung-jin said. "I know." 2 incidents flagged. "I know." Sung-jin looked at his son for the first time. His face was composed in the way that masks are composed, everything in place, nothing revealed unless he chose to reveal it. He was 51 and looked 45. The way men look when their stress has been converted entirely into control rather than being allowed to age them honestly. "Are they manageable?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." He picked up the document again. Then, without looking up, "Reputation is everything, Jae-won. That school is not a playground. It is a training ground. You are being watched. You control people, or you are controlled by them. These are the only 2 options." Jae-won held a piece of rice in his chopstick and looked at it. "Understood," he said. Sung-jin turned a page. "Good." That was dinner. Jae-won went to his room, which was large and cold and filled with things that had been bought for him rather than chosen by him, and he sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the city through his floor-to-ceiling window and thought about a girl picking up a wet notebook with careful hands. Like it still mattered. He opened his own notebook, not for school, never for school, and started to write something. Stopped. Closed it. Lay back on the bed. Stared at the ceiling. Control people, or be controlled. He had been hearing that sentence since he was 7 years old. He had built himself around it the way buildings are built around their structural cores, everything else aesthetic, decorative, removable. The core unmovable. But structural cores are not designed to feel things. That was the arrangement. He closed his eyes. Behind them, that look. That specific, devastating look that said I see you, and I am sorry for what I see. He pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum. Next day at school, the group project for advanced contemporary literature was assigned on a Tuesday. The task, analyze a work of post-colonial literature through the lens of identity fragmentation, present findings in a creative format written, visual, or performed. Groups of 4. Assigned randomly, Mr. O had said, though the randomness had clearly been calibrated to ensure Jae-won and Amora were in the same group. Jae-won suspected Mr. O had done this accidentally. Mr. O did most things accidentally. The group had 30 minutes of class time for initial discussion. They arranged their desks. The other two, Kim Sabin, a quiet girl who kept her head down and agreed with everything, and Marcus, a half-Nigerian half-Korean student who had the energy of someone constantly bracing for impact, settled into uneasy orbit around the two of them. Jae-won said nothing for the first 5 minutes. He was waiting, in the way predators wait, not from laziness but from the knowledge that waiting itself is a form of control. Let the others speak first. Let them expose their frameworks. Marcus suggested they do a standard essay. Sabin agreed immediately. Amora turned a page in her notebook. What if we do it as a parallel narrative, she said. Her voice was not soft exactly, it was measured. Calibrated. Like someone who had learned to pour their words carefully because they'd seen what happened when the container overflowed. What does that mean? Marcus asked. She placed her notebook open on the desk so they could see, and Jae-won, despite himself, leaned forward slightly. The page held a diagram. Hand-drawn, precise, connecting two narrative threads, one representing the colonial text itself, one representing the contemporary reader's fragmented experience of receiving it. Arrows indicating where the two timelines bled into each other. Annotations in 3 different ink colors for 3 different categories of analysis. It was the most organized and original framework Jae-won had seen in 2 years of this school. He sat back. Said nothing. Sabin made a small amazed sound. Marcus started asking questions. Amora walked them through it calmly, building the architecture of the idea piece by piece, the way a person builds something they have been living with privately for a long time and are only now finding the language to share. Jae-won watched her hands as she pointed to the diagram. The confidence in them. The UN self-consciousness. He thought, unbidden, she's been the smartest person in every room she's ever entered, and nobody's ever treated her like it. The thought surprised him. He disliked it for that. The park, Marcus said, using the name Jae-won's crew used, the definite article, the one that made it clear he was not a person but a category. What do you think? Jae-won looked at the diagram. It works, he said. Simple. Factual. Not praise. Exactly, he didn't offer praise, it had been trained out of him, but not dismissal either. Amora looked at him. He looked back. For exactly 3 seconds, neither of them performed anything. There was no audience, no arrangement, no structure of dominance and endurance between them. There was just 2 people who had both been shaped into hard things by their circumstances, recognizing something in each other that their circumstances had not yet managed to destroy. Then Marcus said something, and the moment collapsed back into a group project meeting, and Jae-won picked up his pen, and Amora looked back at her notebook. But 3 seconds had been enough. Wednesday came. Seoul in October gets a particular kind of rain, not monsoon, not gentle, a cold, relentless, grey rain that turns the city into a charcoal sketch of itself, all contrast and blur. It had been going since noon, and by the end of the school day it had settled in with the certainty of something that intended to stay. Jae-won was leaving through the eastern exit when he saw her. She was sitting on the low concrete bench under the narrow overhang outside the auxiliary entrance, the one that students only use to go to the parking structure, usually abandoned by 4 o'clock. She was not huddled. She was not crying. She was sitting with her back straight and her bag in her lap and her face turned toward the rain, watching it with an expression that Jae-won had no clean word for. It was not sadness. Sadness was legible, familiar, something you could file. This was something else, the expression of someone who had made a private agreement with grief. Who had decided that grief could be present without being catastrophic. Who had learned to sit inside difficult feelings the way you sit inside weather, not ignoring it, not running from it, simply enduring it with dignity until it passed. He stopped walking. She hadn't heard him. The rain was too loud against the overhang. He stood and watched her for 8 seconds, long enough for him to understand that he was doing something he had never done before, standing still for someone without it being a power move. Without it meaning anything except that he couldn't make himself walk away. Then she shifted, and her eyes moved, and for a half second they were going to land on him. He walked. He turned the corner before contact was made. He walked faster than necessary, hands in his pockets, rain beginning to reach him, And he didn't look back because looking back was not something he did, was not something he had been built for, was not part of the structural core. But his jaw was tight. And his chest felt wrong. And when he got to the car, the black vehicle that waited for him every day at precisely 4:15, driver silent and patient as furniture, he sat in the back seat and did not put his earphones in, which he always did, and he looked out the window as the school disappeared behind him. Regret is a strange thing to feel for a moment that never happened. He felt it anyway. The next day, break bell rang at 10:45. Amora came out of classroom 2B later than most, finishing a sentence in her green notebook, the way she always did, like the thought mattered more than the bell. She tucked it under her arm and moved into the corridor, keeping to the right wall, heading for the stairwell. She almost made it. Bae Tai appeared at her side first. Then Lee Soo. Then Jae-won, behind them, hands in his pockets, pace unhurried. The corridor was full break time, witnesses everywhere, which was, as always, the point. Bae Tai leaned close, matching her stride. New notebook. Green. Did the last one traumatize you? Lisa laughed. Amora kept walking. Jae-won smiled as he watched from behind. The orange wrap. The straight spine. The way she moved through them like she had made a private decision not to let them see the cost of it. Jae-won opened his mouth. Must be exhausting, he said, casual, precise, the kind of delivery that requires no effort but lands with full weight. Writing all the time and still having nothing worth saying. The corridor laughed. She stopped. Didn't turn around immediately. Just stopped. One breath. Then she turned. And she looked at him. Not at Bae Tai. Not at Lee Soo. At Jae-won. Directly. Fully. With the kind of look that doesn't perform anything, not anger, not the dignified blankness she usually offered the corridor. Just seeing him clearly. Every layer of the performance visible to her and named silently and filed. He held it. His face gave nothing. The correct expression, faintly amused, faintly bored. But something moved behind his eyes. There and gone. Quick as weather crossing a window. And in that there was no more amusement. It just felt different. Silence came between the two, long enough that Lisa had to break. He grabbed for Amora's notebook. She pulled back. Her shoulder hit the wall. She caught herself with one hand flat on the concrete, notebook still locked against her chest. The corridor laughed. And something happened in Jae-won's chest. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a turning. Like a dial moved 1 degree in a direction he hadn't approved. He watched her hand on the concrete wall. The way her fingers pressed into it. The way she was holding herself together with the specific, invisible effort of someone who has been doing it so long it no longer shows on the face, only in the hands. Only if you were looking at the hands. He kept on looking at her, so deeply. Not joining them now nor helping her out. Lisa reached for the notebook again, laughing, and Bae Tai was saying something, and the corridor crowd was doing the thing it always did, watching and not watching. Laughing and not quite committing, and Jae-won felt something he had no infrastructure for. He didn't want this to continue. Not in the noble way. Not in the way that would later become a story he told about himself. Just, quietly, privately, in the basement of him where no performance reached, he didn't want to watch her hand on that wall for one more second. He didn't show it. He would not show it. But he moved. His voice came out easy. Bored, almost. Like he just remembered something better. He turned away from her, completely, cleanly, giving the scene his back the way you give something your back when you've decided it no longer deserves your front. There's a game going on in the court. Park-jae bet Hyunki he could actually shoot from the half line. He clicked his tongue. Amused. Ready to be elsewhere. I'm not missing that. That was all it took. The energy shifted instantly, the crew's attention swinging toward him the way attention always swung toward him, helplessly, by habit, by years of calibration. Bae Tai laughed and dropped the moment immediately. Lisa turned, already interested. Someone said no way he makes that shot and someone else said I'll put money on it, and just like that the corridor was just a corridor again, boys moving toward the stairwell, noise redistributing, the scene dissolving the way scenes dissolve when their architect decides he's done with them. They moved past her. Around her. Gone. Jae-won walked with them. Laughing at the right moment. Saying the right thing about the bet. His hands easy in his pockets, his face easy in the afternoon light. He did not look back. But in the last half second before the corner took her out of his peripheral vision, he felt it more than saw it. Her. Still against the wall and notebook against her chest. He turned the corner. His jaw tightened once, sharp, involuntary, and then released. He kept walking. He kept laughing. He kept being exactly who the corridor required him to be. He couldn't be caught being merciful to her. Later in the day, after the closing bell rang an hour ago, the classroom after school hours was a different room entirely. Without 30 people and their noise and their social performance, it became simply itself a rectangle of institutional furniture, light falling through the windows in long amber columns that turned the dust motes into something almost beautiful. The whiteboard still held the remnants of the afternoon's lesson, half erased. The chairs were pushed back at odd angles. The room smelled like chalk and floor wax and the specific loneliness of places built for groups that have all gone home. Amora was the only one left. She moved through the empty room with the ease of someone who found solitude replenishing rather than threatening. She straightened a desk that had been left crooked just automatically, just because it was there, and went back to her own seat and began methodically packing her bag, checking each item before placing it, her burgundy notebook last, wrapped in the cloth she carried for exactly this purpose. The notebook held against her chest for a moment before it went into the bag. She didn't hear him come in. Or maybe she did and decided not to mark it. Jae-won stood in the doorway for a moment before entering. The light from the hallway framed him briefly, then he stepped into the amber of the room and became part of it, and the door swung shut behind him on its slow hydraulic hinge. He put his hands in his pockets. He leaned against the desk nearest the door. He watched her. She continued packing. The silence between them had a particular quality, not the silence of two strangers who don't know each other, and not the performed silence of their usual dynamic. This silence was the kind that exists when two people have said enough unsaid things that speech feels almost redundant. Have you stolen enough of my gaze? His voice in the empty room was different from his voice in a full one. Quieter. Less constructed. Amora's hands paused. Just for a breath. She resumed packing. You're always watching. He said it like an accusation, though something beneath the words was more complicated than accusation. Taking notes. Studying everything. She pulled the strap of her bag over her shoulder. Said nothing. He stepped closer. The amber light moved across the floor between them. You didn't say anything today, he said. In the group presentation. When Mr. O asked for comments. His jaw tightened. You said nothing. She tilted her head, slightly. Why do you notice what I say and don't say? But she didn't say that. She just simply thought and didn't reply. He stepped closer again. Now there were two desks between them. The room had gotten very still. Did you finally learn your place? The words came out with the right coating, cold, amused, dismissive, the words that were supposed to land like a door closing, like a verdict handed down. They were good words, well-practiced words, words that had made 17 different people cry in 4 years. Amora slowly looked up. Showing unreadable expression. She just looked tired. Not the tiredness of someone who has given up, the tiredness of someone who has been patient for longer than patience should reasonably require, and has decided to spend a small portion of what remains. Do you feel strong, she said quietly, when they're watching? The room received the question and held it. Jae-won stiffened. Something moved behind his eyes, not anger, exactly. Something that anger is built on top of. Something more original. What are you talking about? He smirked. Silence came in again as they both watched each other until finally. Amora walked 2 steps close to him. Nothing, she said, and as she proceeded to walk past him. Don't. Nothing, she said again, and this time the word was not dismissal, it was something stranger. It was almost gentle. Like she was letting him off a hook she could see he didn't know he was on. She moved to step around him. He did not block her. He didn't know why. His body, which had always known how to arrange itself into walls and obstacles, simply didn't. She was beside him for 1 step, 2, and then she was past him, and he turned but he didn't reach, and she walked to the door and pushed it open and the hallway light fell across her back. She didn't look back. The door swung shut. Jae-won stood in the amber light, in the chalk and floor wax silence, in the room that had suddenly gotten very large. His hand had moved to his sternum again. He looked down at it like it was doing something without his authorization. For the first time, someone didn't look like she was afraid of what he would do next. He had ruled this school through a very simple mechanism: people's fear of what came next. Fear of escalation. Fear of his father's name and all the weight attached to it. Fear of social extinction, of being on the wrong side of the only axis that mattered in a school like this. But she wasn't scared. The way she walked close to him and looked deep in his eyes. That terrified him. He stood in the empty classroom for a long time. Then he sat down at the nearest desk, a desk that was not his, and looked at the whiteboard. And said nothing to no one for reasons he could not yet name. The next week, the crack became visible. Not to him, he was the last to see things that were happening to him, had been his whole life, but to the people around him who had built their entire social architecture on being able to read him accurately. Hyunki noticed it first. "You're not eating," he said at lunch. "You're also not doing that thing where you make Lisa feel stupid." "I make Lisa feel stupid every day," Jae-won said. "Not today." Jae-won picked up his chopsticks. "Put them down." Across the cafeteria, Amora was sitting at the end of a table near the window alone, which was normal, which she had apparently decided was preferable to the performance of belonging in a place that had not actually made room for her. She was writing in a new notebook, smaller than the previous one. The old one, the burgundy one, had been ruined. "You're staring again," Hyunki said. "I'm not staring. You've been staring since last week." Hyunki set down his food. He was one of the few people in Jae-won's life who could say things directly, partially because his family's relationship with Jae-won's father was sufficiently established that a certain frankness was permitted. "What's happening with the African girl?" "Nothing. That's not a nothing face. It's my normal face." "Your normal face doesn't have feelings in it." Jae-won looked at him. Hyunki looked back, unafraid in the specific way of someone who has calculated that his position is secure enough to risk it. Before either of them could continue, there was a sound from across the cafeteria, laughter, the wrong kind, the kind that has a target. Bae Tai, standing near Amora's table. He'd knocked her new notebook off the table. Was laughing about it with the boy next to him, performing casualness, performing accident. She was bending to pick it up. Jae-won watched. In the past, in the recent past, in the past of 2 weeks ago, he would have watched this and felt nothing, or felt the dim satisfaction of a system operating correctly, or felt nothing at all. He had been very good at feeling nothing. It had been one of his primary achievements. He watched Bae Tai lean down and say something to her, something quiet, something that made his mouth shape the particular way that mouths shape cruelty when they want it to be deniable. Amora straightened, held her notebook, looked at Bae Tai with the same look she had given Jae-won in the empty classroom, tired, clear, unafraid, and turned back to her table. Bae Tai laughed and walked away. Jae-won realized his hand was flat on the table, pressing down hard. He moved it before Hyunki could see. He didn't laugh. He hadn't laughed once. Hyunki was very quiet beside him. The kind of quiet that means noted. The notebook surfaced on a Thursday. Jae-won wasn't looking for it. This was important to him later, that he hadn't been looking. It had appeared, the way things appear when the universe has decided you are ready to receive them and doesn't particularly care whether you agree. He had stayed late genuinely, for once. The literature project required an actual submission and even Jae-won had limits about grades and was moving through the classroom picking up his things when something caught his peripheral vision. Under the radiator along the far wall. Dark and flat and half buried under the dust and the silence. He pulled it out. Burgundy. Soft at the corners. Still warped from where the water had reached it. The ink on the pages had bled and bloomed in patterns that were almost beautiful accidental art, the destruction of her careful sentences transformed by water into something abstract and aching. Some pages were fully lost. Others had survived in fragments, a line here, a margin note there, half a paragraph struggling through the water damage like something that refused to be entirely erased. He should not open it. He opened it. He read slowly. He read the fragments of class notes, literature, history, a page of Korean vocabulary she was clearly teaching herself. He read a list titled Things I Miss that he didn't allow himself to finish reading because his chest was doing the pressing thing again and he was alone and there was no performance required and that made the pressing thing worse, not better. And then he turned a page and found one that the water had touched only at the edges, the center preserved, the handwriting clear and deliberate, as though this page had been written with more intention than the others. She had been writing about the school. About navigating it. About learning its invisible rules and the way power distributed itself through its hallways and cafeteria tables and basketball courts. And in the middle of this, embedded as naturally as breath, him. She had not written his name. She had written him, just him, at the bottom of the page, the line. He acts like a king. His crown, but not his command. Jae-won read it 3 times. The 3rd time, he had to sit down. He sat on the floor of the empty classroom with her ruined notebook in his hands and read the line again and felt something, whatever it was, he felt it fully breaking the glass he usually kept between himself and his interior that he did not have the architecture to contain. She knew. She had looked at him across every terrible thing he had done in her presence and she had seen not the performance, not the heir to the Park legacy, not the boy who poured water on notebooks and blocked doorways and kept people in their proper coordinates. She had seen behind it. Had seen the mechanism. Had understood that control is what you build when someone has taught you that love is conditional and power is the only reliable currency. His crown, but not his command. He pressed the heel of his hand against his mouth. He was going to see her. Tomorrow. He was going to walk up to her desk and he was going to ask something. Something he didn't know yet. He would figure it out. He would find the words, or stand in front of her without them, or give her the notebook back, or ask her what the line meant, though he knew what it meant, though the meaning had already entered him through the sternum and was currently doing extensive damage to the structural core. He would ask anyway. He wanted to hear her say it. He held the notebook against his chest and sat in the dark classroom until the building's automated lights clicked off and the city outside the windows became the only illumination. Episode finale, the empty seat. The morning was ordinary. This is what he would remember later, the total, devastating ordinariness of it. The hallway. The locker bank. The servile clearing of a path. The classroom door swinging open at 8:30 for an 8:30 class. He had come early today. Not for the class, that's how bad he needed to see He walked to his seat. He looked at the 3rd row, window seat. The chair was empty. Not pushed back, not recently vacated. Empty in the architectural sense, the absence of presence, the absence of the particular gravity that a person leaves in a space they habitually occupy. Her desk was bare. No notebook. No orange fabric. No deliberate, quiet, infuriating writing. He sat down. He told himself it meant nothing. She was late. Or sick. Or. Mr. O entered, placed his folder on the desk, surveyed the attendance sheet. Okay. A few announcements before we begin. He adjusted his glasses. The literature project deadline has been extended by 1 week, relieved murmurs, and also, I got a letter yesterday concerning your mate Amora Oay, a transfer letter, he said. Simply. Change of institution and of residence. Filed with personal reasons. He made his mark. Turned the page. We have approved it and we wish her well. He was already moving on before. Why? The word left Jae-won's mouth before he knew it. The room went very, very still. Not the usual still, not the deferential hush that preceded his pronouncements. A different still. The still of 23 people witnessing something unexpected. Something off script. Mr. O looked up. Every head in the room had turned. Jae-won sat with his hands flat on his desk and the word hanging in the air between him and the empty seat 3 rows forward, and he became aware in real time, watching the awareness cross the faces around him, that what had just happened was out of ordinary. That he asking a question like that, in that voice, for that reason, was an event outside the recognized parameters of everything this school understood about him. He felt his jaw tighten. He did not look away. He never looked away. Personal issue, Mr. O said. Carefully. In the voice of a man who had been told something and instructed to share only the words personal issue and nothing else. Jae-won looked at him for one more second. Then looked at the empty seat. Mr. O began the lesson. After class, when the room emptied and the noise of the hallway swallowed everyone else, Jae-won walked to the third row. He stood at her desk. He opened the drawer. Empty. He ran his hand across the surface, the flat, institutional wood that held nothing of her, no trace, no mark, nothing, and the blankness of it landed in him the way blankness lands when you suddenly understand it is not temporary. He straightened. Outside the window, Seoul continued. Traffic on the bridge in the middle distance. A cloud crossing the sun and recrossing it. The ordinary machinery of a world that had not stopped for this. The classroom noise from the hallway reached him in fragments. He stood at her empty desk and looked out at the city she had disappeared into, and the boy who had built himself out of control and coldness and his father's instructions, the boy who had ruled this school through 4 years of careful, orchestrated, ruthless management of every human variable within his reach felt, for the first time, the specific panic of losing something he had never allowed himself to claim. On that day, he realized he had already lost her. But he couldn't accept that it ended that way, so the search begins. It started the way obsessions always start, quietly, with justification. He told himself he was returning the notebook. The burgundy one. The ruined one he had found under her desk and taken home and read and was still reading, in the dark of his room, in the hours when the city outside his window had gone quiet enough that there was nothing left to perform for. He told himself it was simply about returning it. He found her address through channels available to someone with his name, a contact who received the request and asked no questions, a message returned within the hour containing a building address in Mapo district. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He drove himself, which he almost never did, because driving himself meant there was no witness to the destination. Her building was a clean, modest high-rise. The kind of building that international families lived in, fully furnished, practical, designed for people who were here temporarily and knew it. He went up to the 7th floor, stood at the door, knocked. Silence. He knocked again. Nothing. He went back downstairs. The ground floor of the building had the particular atmosphere of a place where people lived in proximity without quite knowing each other, a row of mailboxes along one wall, a notice board with flyers half peeled at the corners, the low hum of a building doing its quiet mechanical work. A woman in her 60s was coming out of the ground floor apartment nearest the entrance, plastic bag in hand, coat half-buttoned against the October cold. Jae-won stepped toward her. Excuse me. He kept his voice measured. Neutral. The voice he used when he needed something from someone and understood that the direct application of his usual pressure would produce the wrong result. The family on the 7th floor. The Osays. Do you know them? The woman looked at him with the cautious assessment of someone who has lived long enough to know that young men asking questions about neighbors are not always asking for innocent reasons. Then something in his face, or perhaps simply his age, the fact of him being young enough to seem unthreatening despite everything, softened her slightly. I know them to say hello, she said. The girl and her father. Do you know where they went? She shook her head. Slowly. The head shake of someone who has been genuinely puzzling over something. That's the strange thing. One day they were just gone. I saw the girl 2 days before, in the lift. She seemed fine. Normal. And then one morning I heard movement, very early, before 6, and then nothing. I went up later that week because I had a package that had been delivered to my door by mistake. Knocked. Nothing. The super told me they'd vacated. Did she seem, he stopped. Reformulated. The last time you saw her in the lift. Did she seem worried? Distracted? The woman considered this with more seriousness than he'd expected. She seemed quiet, she said finally. But she was always quiet. A serious girl. Very polite. She paused. Though, now that you ask, she was holding her bag very tightly. Both hands. I remember thinking it was an odd way to hold a bag. She looked at him. Are you a friend of hers? Jae-won held the word friend in his mind for a moment. Yes, he said. He came back on Wednesday. He knocked on 3 more doors on the 7th floor. Questions. But no answer helped much. On Thursday he tried the floor below. A man who worked from home and had occasionally shared the morning lift with Amora. He remembered her clearly, the African girl with the hair wrap, always had a notebook and said she had seemed, in the last week before she disappeared, like someone carrying something heavy. Not physically. Inside. He had attributed it to school stress. Students always looked like that in October. Did she say anything to you? Jae-won asked. Anything at all? The man thought. Once. She asked me out of nowhere, completely unprompted, whether I knew of any organizations in Seoul that helped people in difficult situations. Shelters, she said. Or legal aid. He frowned at the memory. I thought it was a school project. Some kind of social research. Jae-won looked at him. I didn't think anything of it, the man said. His frown deepened slightly. Should I have? Jae-won said nothing. He went back up to the 7th floor. He stood at her door for a long time. Then, because standing at it had become something his body did automatically now, the way you return to the sight of something without deciding to, he crouched down. He looked at the gap under the door. Dark. Silent. He was about to stand when he saw it. Not under the door, beside it. Wedged into the narrow gap between the door frame and the wall, at knee height, so precisely placed that it was invisible unless you were already at floor level, already looking. A small folded piece of paper. White. Pressed flat into the gap with the deliberateness of something hidden rather than dropped. He pulled it out carefully. Unfolded it. It was not a letter. Not an address. Not anything with a name on it. 3 lines. Handwritten. In English, but arranged with the compressed intentionality of something that wanted to say more than its words directly said, the way poems carry weight between their lines, in the negative space, in what they choose not to explain. The one who you seek has been given to another's hands. Wed against the wishes of her own unspoken heart. Seek not the bird, seek instead the cage, and who commands it. He read it once. He read it again. It was not addressed to anyone. It had no signature. It had been placed in that gap by someone who either knew someone would come looking or who had put it there for reasons he couldn't yet see. Its deniability, its ability to mean nothing to the wrong person and everything to the right one. He didn't fully understand it. But he understood enough. The one who I seek. He folded the paper carefully, the exact crease, and put it in his inside jacket pocket, against the burgundy notebook. He stood up. He looked at the door one more time. Then he turned and walked to the lift. He needed to get back to school. The next morning Hyun-ki was waiting for him at the classroom door. Not aggressively. Not with confrontation. Hyun-ki had never been aggressive. His particular value to Jae-won's orbit had always been his steadiness, his capacity for observation, his willingness to say things plainly when everyone else was performing. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his expression carrying the particular quality of someone who has been patient long enough and has decided that patience has reached its natural limit. You've been gone, he said. Jae-won walked past him into the classroom. I've been here every day. You've been here. Hyun-ki followed. Gone is different from not being here. He sat down. Bae Tai thinks you're sick. Lee-soo thinks you met a girl. Lee-soo thinks everything is about a girl. Is he wrong? Jae-won sat down. Opened his bag. Said nothing. Hyun-ki watched him. You haven't been at the court in 2 weeks. You didn't come to Bae Tai's thing on Saturday. You left lunch early 3 days in a row. He paused. People are noticing. People can notice. Jae-won. The use of his name without a title, without irony, Hyun-ki's version of seriousness. What's going on? Jae-won looked at the 3rd row, window seat. Empty. Still. Of course still. Family thing, he said. My father has me running something for him. Logistics. It's taking time. It was the right kind of lie, specific enough to be believable, connected to a world that Hyun-ki knew better than to question. Okay, Hyun-ki said. He didn't say I believe you. He was too intelligent for that. But he let it go, which was what Jae-won needed. Bae Tai arrived a minute later, loud, carrying the energy of someone performing normalcy on behalf of a group that had felt slightly unmoored without its center. He said something about the weekend, about a bet, about someone's older brother's car. Lisa laughed. The crew reassembled around him like furniture returning to a rearranged room, close, but not quite the same configuration. Jae-won sat in the middle of it and thought about 3 lines of verse in his jacket pocket. He waited until after class. There was a girl in the year, Kim Ji-young, international track, the kind of student who existed in every school and was recognized by the particular quality of her stillness in class, total absorption, the stillness of someone for whom learning was not a performance but a genuine appetite. She was the top of the international literature cohort. She had won a regional poetry competition 2 years running. She read in 4 languages and spoke 3 of them fluently. She was also, crucially, someone who had no relationship to Jae-won's social world, no debt to it, no fear of it, no investment in its hierarchy. She occupied a different stratum entirely, the stratum of students who are so thoroughly elsewhere mentally that the social architecture of the school simply doesn't reach them. He found her in the library after the last class, which is exactly where he had expected to find her. She looked up when he approached her table with the expression of someone who has been interrupted from something important and is deciding how to feel about it. Then she registered who he was and her expression shifted into something more careful. Park-jae, she said. Not warmly. Not coldly. Factually. Kim Ji-young. He sat down across from her without asking. Then, because he was self-aware enough, at least, to recognize that the situation required a different register than his usual one, he placed the folded paper on the table between them and said, simply, I need you to tell me what this means. She looked at the paper. Then at him. You need me to tell you. You're the best reader in this school. Yes. The directness of it, undecorated, no performance, just the plain statement of a fact, seemed to recalibrate something in her assessment of him. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she unfolded the paper. She read it. Once. Then again, more slowly. The library was quiet around them, the particular focused quiet of a space built for concentration, the kind that makes even small sounds feel deliberate. Somewhere in the stacks, a trolley wheel squeaked. Outside the window, the late afternoon was going grey. Ji-young set the paper flat on the table. Where did you get this? She asked. Does it matter? It might. She looked at him. This isn't casual writing. Someone wrote this carefully. With intention. She touched the edge of the paper. The structure is deliberate, it's using the form of a coded message dressed as poetry. 3 lines. Each one carrying 1 layer of meaning. Tell me the meaning. She looked at the paper again. Her finger moved along the first line. The one who you seek. She looked up. This simply means someone who you're looking for. She moved to the second line. Has been given to another's hands, wed against the wishes of her own unspoken heart. She was quiet for a moment. Someone has been taken. Given, not chosen. Married, or being taken toward marriage. Without her consent. Without her agreement. She looked at him steadily. Someone is being forced into a marriage they did not choose. The library's quiet pressed in around him. He said nothing. Ji-young moved to the third line. Seek not the bird, seek instead the cage, and who commands it. She folded the paper back along its crease. Pushed it toward him. Don't look for the person who is trapped. Look for the structure trapping them. And find whoever is in control of that structure. She sat back. Looked at him with the clear, undecorated gaze of someone who has understood more than she's been told and is choosing how much of that understanding to voice. The person this is about, she said. Do you know who they are? Jae-won picked up the paper. Yes, he said. He stood. Thank you, he said and meant it, which was not something he said often enough to have it come out practiced. Ji-young watched him go with the expression of someone who has just handed someone else a lit match and is now wondering what they intend to do with it. He went back that evening with a lot in his mind. Just what the hell is going on in your life? I'll find you, whatever it takes. Watch out for episode 2.